morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here on ABC News Live. We are coming to you right after the end of the latest Democratic debate. Joining me to bring some analysis to what we heard tonight are ABC News contributors Yvette Simpson and Matthew Dowd. So, Yvette, I'm going to start with you. Who won tonight?
You know, I think it was so close that nobody won, and so that means Bernie wins, right? So he's in the lead, and if they don't take him out, then he's the winner. I think it was so fraught with discord. I feel like it was tough for folks to get points out, particularly at the top of the debate. And I think at the end of the day, the attacks that Bernie suffered did not hurt him at all.
I mean, he clearly came in with a bullseye on his back, and it doesn't seem like anybody really hit the center of that bullseye.
They didn't, and I love that moment when he had with Pete Buttigieg, when Pete was trying to talk over him, when he was saying, look, these are not radical ideas, these are not radical ideas. As much as Pete tried to talk over him, the audience really responded, and I thought it was a clear moment for him to say, stop calling me a radical. These are ideas that people care about, and this is what I'm about. And so I don't know that he was weakened at all. I think that there were a few moments where Amy Klobuchar came through as the adult in the room, and I was expecting Elizabeth Warren to be more forceful as you know, the unifier, as the teacher, to say, hey guys, let's tone this down. And she really got lost again at certain points of the debate where I felt like she should have been the one to step up. And I think Amy stole that from her just a little bit. But I'm still waiting for Amy to come out with some real concrete ideas and talk about what she's going to do as president.
And Matthew Dowd, your idea of who won tonight?
Well, it's hard for me to, I always hesitate on winners and losers, but I would say Joe Biden, of all the 11 debates he's been in, this was his best performance, and it came at a crucial moment for him. I think he was more forceful than he's ever been. I think he responded. I think he had a few funny moments. I think some of his end was very good. I think everybody else kind of did in the middle of the pack on this. I think Bloomberg showed up better than he did last week, but that's not saying a lot because of how bad last week was. He was better, but not great. And so I think this, just a few days before South Carolina, in a must-win state for Joe Biden, that he came across the way he did, had his best performance of the day, and it could pull him over the finish line come Saturday in South Carolina, when we'll find out for sure, and it couldn't have come at a more crucial time. And if that happens, if Joe Biden has a performance like tonight and then wins South Carolina, this is again a remakes the race. Bernie Sanders still has the lead, but we're now in for a long, long struggle in this campaign.
All right, stick with us, because I know you don't like playing this game, Matt, but we'll come back to, we won't call them the losers, but we'll say the people who didn't fare so well. But first, I want to bring in my colleague, Eva Pilgrim. She's been in South Carolina all week covering the candidates for us. She joins us now live from the Spin Room in Charleston following the debate. Eva, what's the mood there now?
Well, you're starting to see some of the surrogates come around, and the candidates are actually in the spin room right now. I see Mayor Pete Buttigieg right beside me. Amy Klobuchar is further down. Even Bernie Sanders is in here tonight. There was a lot of whiplash going on in the debate, and I think the candidates weren't really able to get the points across like they wanted to as clearly and concisely. So I think we're going to see a lot of them come in here tonight to try to make the points that they wanted to make on that debate stage, Lindsay.
And curious, I see Mary Alice there next to you. Mary Alice, your take on tonight, and any particular moments that struck you?
You could really tell the candidates were feeling the pressure was on. The moderator started by saying this was really the last chance for them to all be on the debate stage before this race goes national. We are just a week away from Super Tuesday, and you can tell they were trying to talk to the whole country. I was struck by the fact that Elizabeth Warren used a lot of her time to try to draw contrast with Bernie Sanders and not just Mayor Bloomberg. That was new for her, and a tactic I think we'll see her repeat a lot in the next week.
And also, we have here with us the mayor of D.C., Mayor Bowser. Thank you so much for being. You were a surrogate for Michael Bloomberg.
That's correct.
How do you think he performed tonight? Because his first debate didn't go as he would have liked.
Well, I think he did a great job. He got everything done that he needed to get done and showed the American people that he's the adult in the room. He has experience. He has the record. And he has a national plan to win this election.
We saw him going after Bernie Sanders. Do you think he really landed any good punches on him tonight?
Well, I think he has been willing to take it to Bernie when the other candidates haven't. He pointed out the gate that Bernie's candidacy is being aided by the Russians, and why do the Russians want Bernie to be our nominee? And I think all of the candidates did a very good job highlighting how Bernie has great ideas. He doesn't have the record of getting them done after 30 years in the Congress, and doesn't have a real plan to pay for them now. So I think Bernie is being called to the carpet.
We were talking about that moment with Bernie Sanders and Mayor Pete actually speaking over each other, and Yvette was talking about how Bernie was saying, "Stop calling my ideas radical." Is it your impression that his ideas are, like he says, sort of too radical for the party?
Well, that's what I hear from Democrats in all states all over this country. That's what I hear from congressional Democrats who flipped seats 2 years ago and who are concerned about their races, concerned about losing the House, that having a socialist at the top of the ticket is not going to bring our country together. Not Democrats from the center, and not our more left-leaning independents and Republicans.
Do you think, though, the public, when they look to choose who the candidate's going to be, is thinking about that down-the-ballot vote?
Well, I do, because people know that with Nancy Pelosi in charge of the House, we have been able to have a check on this White House. And the possibility of losing the White House, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, and having a completely unchecked Donald Trump is a disaster for our nation.
Senator Warren actually said she thought Mayor Bloomberg was the most risky candidate. She said that she thought the core of the Democratic Party was not going to come around to vote for someone who used to be a Republican. How would you
I just find it odd that she attacks Mayor Bloomberg when it's Bernie Sanders that's tranching her in every race that they've been in so far. So what we need to focus on Democrats is who do we want to be our nominee? Doesn't look like it's going to be Senator Warren. She hasn't done well, even in her own backyard. So let's look at who's at the top of the ticket, and if we think that they can carry a victory in the White House, but also helping our congressional Democrats.
Do you think it's going to hurt him that he hasn't released his taxes? Does he sound too much like the president when he gets those questions?
He will release his taxes. He was mayor of New York for 12 years. He released his taxes for every one of those years, and he will release his taxes.
Mayor, thank you so much for being here
guys.
with us.
Thank you.
Lindsay, we'll send it back to you. We'll be talking to a lot of the candidates and their surrogates here in the spin room tonight.
All right. Thank you, ladies, live for us in South Carolina. Yvette, all I kept seeing was a shaking head over there. It was the opposite of the bobblehead. So what were you disagreeing with?
You know, first of all, let me just say with all due respect, I understand why mayors love Bloomberg, right? I mean, he has delivered a lot of resources to cities and to mayors. But they should be the first to check him about stop and frisk. They know how dangerous that is. And I think the idea that...
We did see Pete Buttigieg do that tonight.
Yes, but I mean, some of his surrogates are not acknowledging, and I think that was the question that was asked, how is he going to win with women, and how is he going to win with black and brown voters when he has this horrible record with Muslim citizens in his city, with Latino citizens in the city, and the fact that they're not confronting that is really challenging. I also think the idea that these, the disagreement with the ideas that most Americans support, Medicare for all, tuition-free college, combating climate change, that those are radical ideas is not been borne out in the polls, is what I'm saying. And so the rejection of that is challenging. I also wanted to make sure I challenge this idea about the House, right? And I love the pushback on that. Do most Americans understand that, or is that a D.C. establishment argument? The reality is that we want a lot of great, diverse seats all over the country because people want to combat Trump and they want to see real change in their government. And so I was kind of shaking my head because I understand she's a surrogate and I understand why she supports him. But it's really interesting to hear the difference between the way that I think more establishment Democrats think about this versus the way that everyday Americans think about it.
Matthew Dowd, I want to bring you in here. As far as we're talking about viewers at home who are watching, and we saw again and again Elizabeth Warren getting on Michael Bloomberg for, when are you going to release your taxes? Are you going to release the women from their NDAs? Do these kinds of issues still matter at this point for people who are at home deciding if they're going to vote for Bloomberg or not?
Well, I think she did such a job on Bloomberg last week. She didn't need to keep doing it this week. And I think it's overkill with Michael Bloomberg. He's already upside down on his favorabilities among Democratic voters. He's more unpopular than popular among Democrats, which is a bad start for a general election. I think Elizabeth Warren keeps missing the strategic imperative that she has. And when you're a candidate, you have to decide who is in your way to win the nomination. And who is in Elizabeth Warren's way to win the nomination is Bernie Sanders. She had a slight little brushback of him at the very beginning, but then never did it again. And so if Elizabeth Warren fundamentally wants to be the Democratic nominee for president, the person that is standing in her way is not Joe Biden, is not Amy Klobuchar, is not Michael Bloomberg. It is Bernie Sanders. And until she figures that out, she's not going to move in the polls.
And obviously going into tonight, Senator Sanders had a lot of criticism about Cuba. I want to play his response from tonight on that and then come back to you on that, Matt.
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world, and I was really amazed at what Mayor Bloomberg just said a moment ago. He said that the Chinese government is responsive to the Politburo. But who the hell is the Politburo responsive to? Who elects the Politburo? You got a real dictatorship there? Of course you have a dictatorship in Cuba. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education.
And Matt, do you feel that he did enough to kind of put the Cuba criticism, potential vulnerability to bed tonight, or is this something that's going to keep coming back up?
So I have two points on this. First, I think it's been the people that have criticized Bernie Sanders on this have been a bit unfair about this, because Bernie Sanders, if you look at in the totality of what he said Castro is a bad guy. I condemn authoritarianism, but oh, by the way, they did some good things, but I don't accept that Castro was a good leader. He said that. So the context is important for that. That aside, by doing that, he's put a target on his back. And that's why some Democrats have come out and criticized him. He's made himself vulnerable in a general election when the Republicans, if he wins the nomination, when the Republicans and Donald Trump come and attack him. I think it's an unforced error for him not to clean it up. He didn't clean it up. He's still saying the same thing. But when you look at it in totality, I understand totally what Bernie Sanders is trying to say in this. It just paints an unfortunate target on his back.
Unforced error, that?
I think so. I mean, I think what he's trying to articulate, which I think is important for the policies that he supports, is that these policies have been tested in a lot of places, paying for education and making sure you make that a priority, healthcare and providing that everywhere, that those are important policies that have worked all around the world, and that they even work when you've got a really, really bad leader, because we need to be investing. But I think in this case, I think Matt is right. It may end up coming back to hurt him. One of the good things, though, was that he pointed out that Obama did the same thing, and I think it was really tough for the others to come back after that.
You had been saying that earlier. I want to toss now to Bernie Sanders, who's live in the spin room at this time.
And I think the founding fathers of this country were not stupid. And they said, good, we're going to create the House, majority rules, and in the Senate it's going to be a little bit different. And I think that that's okay. I think in the Senate you want people to stand up. They want to filibuster. They want to get up and talk for 8 or 9 hours. I did that. They have a right to do that. But at the end of the day, if on all of the important legislation that I am campaigning on, we're not going to wait for 60 votes. We will pass it with a majority plus the vice president of the United States.
You mentioned you would consider moving the embassy back to where it was. Why bring that up? Why would you?
Well, that was the question that I was asked.
Not bring that up, but why would you consider moving?
Well, I
back
think
to
what you want to do is, embassy location is a symbolic statement on the part of the United States. And what I'm saying is it has to be looked at within the context of the United States doing everything it can, A, to protect the independence and security of Israel, but also, finally, providing justice to the Palestinian people. You got youth unemployment in Gaza, something like 70%. People cannot even leave Gaza, despite the miserable living conditions there. And I want, and my foreign policy will be to say to the Israelis, to say to the Palestinians, you know what, we're going to start working this stuff out. But it cannot just be a one-sided policy pro-Israel. It has to consider the pain and the suffering of the Palestinian people as well.
Anything happen on that stage to stop your momentum?
I think we did just fine, and I think the issues that we're talking about, raising that minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour, making sure that every kid in this country has the opportunity to go to college regardless of income, demanding that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. I think that's an agenda supported by the American people. I think that's going to get us past the goalpost.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Best tonight. Thank you. Thanks, man.
And I think that Eva Pilgrim, she has Tom Steyer with her. Eva, are you ready to join us? Oh, yeah, there you are. Eva, we're going to send it back to you.
Yeah, we do. We have Tom Steyer here with us. He just came off the debate stage. How do you feel about the night?
Look, I thought it was a great chance to distinguish. Look, I think there's something going on in the Democratic primary, which is this. We're coming down to the place where the press wants to believe that we're either going to be pushing for a socialist or somebody who's been a traditional Republican, and that we're taking a real risk here, that we're going to that in doing so we could split the party and re-elect Donald Trump. And so one of the things I was trying to say is, wow, there are other alternatives that actually there are people like me who are progressive Democrats who've been fighting corporations for years and getting things done as an outsider, who actually represents the Democratic Party, in a serious way and can pull people together. Because if we all show up in November, we win, and if we don't, we don't.
At different points of the debate tonight, people said that Bernie Sanders would be a risky nominee and might not be able to beat Trump, and people said that Mayor Bloomberg would be a risky nominee.
I was one of the people who said that.
And so who do you think is more risky, and is that fair? You really think that some Democrats just can't win?
I didn't say they can't win. I think there's a difference between can't and risk. I think that the real question here is we need a big turnout across the board, and we need to pull together the whole Democratic Party. And that means, across racial, geographic, and also philosophical lines. And it's very clear that if we take somebody who believes in democratic socialism, that is something just like someone with a Republican background, where there are people in the party who are going to have to be convinced to go along with that.
We're heading into South Carolina. You didn't have a great showing in Nevada. You've spent a lot of money and a lot of time here in South Carolina. How do you think you have to do in order to keep your campaign viable?
Look, I think right now I'm in third place in South Carolina. That's what all the polls say. And I'm trying to get out there and see as many people and move up to first place. That's my goal.
And if you don't beat expectations here, are you going to reconsider your campaign? What's your Super Tuesday strategy look like?
Look, I think I'm going to go into Super Tuesday with a lot of momentum from South Carolina, and that's my strategy.
But what if you don't do well in South Carolina? Do you say we're done?
One of the things I've always thought is you never answer conditional questions that you don't believe in. What do you do if tomorrow there's a bomb dropped on, New York City? I don't know. That is not what I expect to happen tomorrow. I don't expect a bomb in New York City. I expect to do well in South Carolina.
So what has been key to your strategy here? Why do you feel so confident about your prospects in South Carolina?
Because I think this is 65% African American Democratic Party here. I'm trying to talk directly to African Americans and Latinos. I'm the person who's talking about reparations. I'm the person who's talking directly about the issues here and is not shying away from race. I think other people are trying to follow me into that, but that's what I've been doing from the beginning.
Joe Biden brought up the issue of privatized prisons and went after you on that tonight. That's something that I think a lot of South Carolinians will take pretty personally. A lot of them really against the idea of privatizing prisons. You owned a business that did that.
Actually, I didn't. I owned stock in a business that did that, and I sold it 15 years ago because I decided it was wrong, and I've worked against it for 15 years. So actually, that was something. The guy who was making that claim actually wrote the crime bill that put hundreds of thousands of black men and Latinos in jail. That's the reason that we incarcerate people at 7 times the rate of other countries. So actually, I did make a mistake. I corrected it, and I've worked on it for a decade. Not only working to get rid of private prisons in my home state, but also working to get rid of the kind of harsh sentencing that Joe Biden has been for. Also working to build a bank specifically to support African American, Latino, and women entrepreneurs. I have a long history of working for racial justice.
My mom has been getting all your flyers in her mailbox, I can tell you that. Lindsay, we will send it back to you. My mom says she gets a flyer almost every single day.
Oh, from Tom's?
Recyclable paper, ladies.
It makes sense. He has spent more money than any other candidate in that state. I want to go now to a moment that Michael Bloomberg called a sideshow when talking about Elizabeth Warren, if we can play that bite from earlier tonight.
And referred to what I talk about as a sideshow. This is personal for me. When I was 21 years old, I got my first job as a special education teacher. I loved that job. And by the end of the first year, I was visibly pregnant. The principal wished me luck and gave my job to someone else. Pregnancy discrimination You bet. But I was 21 years old. I didn't have a union to protect me, and I didn't have any federal law on my side. So I packed up my stuff and I went home. At least I didn't have a boss who said to me, kill it. The way that Mayor Bloomberg
never
is alleged
said
to
that.
have said to one of his pregnant employees.
Never said it. Period. End of story.
Look,
categorically never said it. When I was accused of doing it, we couldn't figure out what she was talking about. But right now, I'm sorry if she heard what she thought she heard or whatever happened. I didn't take any pleasure in that, and we've just got to go on. But I never said it. Come on.
Your reaction to that, Yvette?
So initially, when she brought this up, I was thinking about the Kamala Harris, that little girl was me moment.
Right.
My initial thought was like, okay, here we go. She's talking about herself. She's talking about, and then she brings the story up. So that was my first reaction. It's like, oh, no, we're not going to do this. And I do think that, as Matt said earlier, continuing to hammer on Bloomberg on this thing is going to get kind of old. But then his reaction to me, at first he says, I didn't say it. Categorically, didn't happen. And then he says, I don't know what she heard. I'm not sure what she heard. And my visceral reaction was, okay, do we believe women or don't we believe women? And I think what Elizabeth Warren is trying to do is to get him to acknowledge that this woman said that, why would she make that up, and that we believe women. And it was really, I think he would have been served just to stop and say, done. But when a man who's in authority is confronted with someone who has accused him of something, and well, I don't know what she heard, I'm not sure what she might have heard. And then later in the debate, he acknowledges that he might have made some jokes, he might have said some things. My brain went and put those two together. So I don't know if that was the best moment for him. I think he would have been better served by just denying it and moving on. I think the more he talks, the worse it's going to be for him.
Matt, your reaction to that particular moment?
I totally agree with Yvette on this. I was ready for him to end the statement at categorically say it's not true, it didn't happen. And then he kept talking, and as he kept talking, it was like, well, oh, wait a second, maybe there's some truth to this, because the way he's responding now in the second part of the second sentence was that, well, she might have heard something, I don't know what she heard, we investigated it, we couldn't figure it out, and it only got worse for him in this. And I'm with Yvette. My default position, especially after the trial, the verdict this week in the Me Too movement related to Harvey Weinstein, is to believe the women in this, especially when they're in a lesser power position in a company or in any other situation, Hollywood or wherever they are in life, that they have a less powerful position, that there's no reason for them to make this up in this context, especially after it sounds like she signed some NDA or whatever in the midst of this, that as of yet she's not spoken out or been allowed out of it in this circumstance. So I think, agree with Yvette, he should have ended it there, but he didn't. So this is going to still be an issue for him. Now they're going to go back to the woman. It's going to be a back and forth. What did you actually say? What words did you use? He messed himself up by continuing to talk.
By and large, it seems like the general consensus here is that Michael Bloomberg did better this time around than he did last week, but there was such a low bar potentially last week that it doesn't really mean that much. So I'm curious, just in a hypothetical to both of you, if this had been his first debate performance, talking about Michael Bloomberg, would this have been a winning performance?
You going to me?
Yeah, Matt, you can answer first.
So I would say that, when you lose by 4 touchdowns last week and you lose by 2 touchdowns this week, doesn't mean you won.
So good.
So I think if this was his first debate performance, we would have been, that's a bad performance, but it wasn't a blowout like last week. So that's how I see it.
Okay, how about you?
It's kind of how I feel about Trump every single day. Like, he's just so bad that when he has a halfway decent day, we're like, he's not as bad as he always is. No, I feel like it was not a great performance. I think in the beginning he felt like a robot, and it was clear that he had been coached. He was reading statements. I felt like he loosened up a little bit as the day went on, but when he does that, he kind of has those Biden moments where you can tell he's saying something he shouldn't say. He kind of gets off track. He gets a little defensive. And so I would say that for somebody who really, really expects to be able to beat Trump, this is not a winning debate. And I feel like if you can't handle Elizabeth Warren, if you can't handle this debate field, I don't trust you in the ring with Donald Trump.
Matt, I want to go back to my earlier question at the beginning of the half hour as far as who you felt like didn't fare so well tonight.
Well, I'm going to go back to the idea. I think Bernie Sanders maintained the status quo, so he didn't drop, but he's not going to rise from this, so he stays where he is. I think Elizabeth Warren fundamentally missed a huge opportunity in this debate to provide a real fundamental contrast in a concerted way over 2 hours with Bernie Sanders. In order for her to rise, she has to take a chunk of votes on the progressive side of this away from Bernie Sanders. And I think she has a valid argument to make that she can say, Bernie talks about it, I've gotten it done. Bernie says these things, I'm working on plans to get it fixed. Bernie doesn't provide details, I have details. And so I think the biggest missed opportunity of this debate, in my mind, was Elizabeth Warren still doesn't strategically, fundamentally recognize that her main opponent to getting the nomination is Bernie Sanders.
Yvette, who didn't rise to the occasion tonight?
I actually don't think Biden had the day that he should have. It's funny. I feel like in South Carolina, he should have been a lot more steady, a lot more calm. And I think those moments when he got really aggressive, and there was a point where he had an aggressive moment with Gayle King even, I don't know that like shows very well. You know, if you got somebody with experience and he wants to be commander-in-chief, you kind of want a guy who's got an easy hand. And he was yelling at points where I just didn't think he should yell. And like I said, I felt like I needed to go in the corner in the timeout or something. It was really interesting. Towards the end, when they were asking the questions about like your own personal experience, I felt like he really showed up. He got that, you know, that classic Joe Biden grin. He was leaning back. I felt like I think he felt like there was a lot on the line. And I felt like because of that, he overcompensated when he should have said, it's South Carolina. This is my place. Let me be among my people and actually have, you know, a great day. And I just think he really came off really angry. He didn't seem steady at all, and he didn't seem to be that kind of calm, experienced presence that he needs to be.
I want to toss now to Senator Klobuchar, who just finished talking in the debate room, the spin room following the debate.
Feel like they're trying to get a soundbite for the news tomorrow, and they'll probably be successful. But I thought it was important for the people of South Carolina and for those 14 Super Tuesday states. I thought it was important for them to hear a president. And a president, when asked about coronavirus, talks about what measures people should take to make themselves safe and brings calm to the situation instead of constantly fighting.
Hey, Senator, your home state is coming up. Are you going to win Minnesota?
Of course I am. I'm ahead, I think, in the last two polls, pretty significantly ahead. And it's an important state. There's something like 90 delegates. I think it's one of the things you should know is we have staff in all 14 states. But when you look at what really matters, not just the first step of this primary, step two, look at the general election in Minnesota. There's one person that wins and beats Donald Trump by 17 points. That is me. No one else is close.
And talking about issues that matter to South Carolinians, right up the road in 2015, we were the center of the world when bad news happened here, when the massacre happened, racially motivated massacre. Talk about your plan for gun laws.
One, universal background checks. Two, so critical, closing the Charleston loophole. And Reverend Pickney, in his honor and in the honor of all of those victims from that church, we have to get this done. And literally, we have a president. I was the one that met with him at the White House after Parkland, sat across from him. There's a video. And he said 8 times, I had a little piece of paper, I wrote it down with hash marks, that he wanted to get universal background checks. The next day he met with the NRA and he folded. I will not fold.
Okay, thank you guys.
Was Bernie Sanders' response on guns good enough?
Matt and Yvette, want to bring you guys back in again really quickly because we haven't really talked a lot about Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And listening to Amy Klobuchar and being reminded about where we are in South Carolina days before the primary there, black voters make up 60% of the electorate in South Carolina. We know Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg historically don't have a lot of support and base in the black community. Did they do anything to benefit themselves tonight? We'll start with you.
I don't think so. I mean, Amy even kind of dismissed Southern voters. She talked about how she's from Minnesota and she's going to bring the middle of America together. You're in South Carolina. You need to fight for the South. And I thought it was a really missed opportunity for her. Every time she talks about race issues, she goes straight to voting rights, which honestly, I don't think she has as solid a record as she thinks she does on that. And that is not the only issue. She did avoid the criminal justice question, which I was kind of hoping was going to be brought to her, but she didn't welcome, you know, her history on criminal justice and issues with with as a prosecutor. And so I think at the end of the day, she didn't. And I didn't see her really trying to make a play here. I think she's trying to skip over South Carolina to get to Super Tuesday to get to Minnesota. But the reality is you can't be president for winning your own state. You can be a senator for winning your own state. You got to win more than your own state if you want to be president. And so I thought it was even made me cringe. I said, does she realize she's in the South? You can't be in the South and say, okay, the South isn't important. I'm going to win the middle of America. You have to win everywhere. And people in the South have to feel acknowledged, too.
Matt, your thoughts on Pete and Amy Klobuchar is making that connection with the black voters?
Well, I thought Pete Buttigieg, if you were a professor of rhetoric or debate, you would have given him the most points tonight. I think his answers were the most full sentenced answers, most thought out, best delivered. I thought he was the best delivery of all this tonight. But the problem, I think, right now for Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Tom Steyer is I don't get their political plan. So even if they do reasonably well, none of them had a breakout performance tonight. They all did okay, but none of them had a breakout performance. None of them had anything that was going to put them in the top three, finishing in the top three in my mind in South Carolina. And I don't know how you go into Super Tuesday 3 days later after you finished, as Amy Klobuchar has, 5th or whatever in Nevada, 3rd in one state, 6th in another state. I just don't get what their plan is once South Carolina comes this Saturday and they don't finish in the top three. I don't get the plan.
Matthew Dowd, we thank you so much. You win Best Illustration, Best Analogy for the night. The 4-touchdown loss this week, 2-touchdown loss. And Eva Pilgrim, I want to send it back out to you for final thoughts. And I think you have a Biden surrogate with you.
We do have a Biden surrogate with us, Simone Sanders. Thank you so much for being. How do you think Biden did tonight? He needed to do well. South Carolina is his firewall.
I think well is an understatement. I think Vice President Biden won the debate. And we have been saying that South Carolina is actually our launching pad. South Carolina is a place that launched Bill Clinton to the presidency, that launched Obama to the presidency. And we believe on Saturday it will launch Joe Biden on the path to the presidency.
He said he's going to win handedly here. What does that mean? Are we looking at double digits?
That means we're going to win handedly. Look, I think the reality is, and Vice President Biden spoke to this on the debate stage tonight, that the reason we are going to win South Carolina is because he has worked hard to earn the votes of people here in this state. This is the first nominating contest with the majority of African-American voters in the electorate. 66% of the people that have voted or will vote on Saturday will be people of color, will be black people, the base of the Democratic Party. And, all the South Carolinians in town will tell you that the road to heaven and the White House runs through South Carolina, and I think that's true. And so you cannot be the Democratic nominee. No one has been since 1992 without the express support and majority support of African-American people in this party. It doesn't work like that. And so we call it the launching pad because going after South Carolina, we're going to Super Tuesday. California has been added, but I mean, this is the SEC primary. So we believe that we will garner enough delegates in this process to go all the way to the nomination.
As a South Carolinian, I appreciate the attention. I'll say that. But do you think he has to win here? What is handedly, to get him into Super Tuesday?
Look, I will let you pontificate, but let me just say, we plan to do extremely well, and we intend to win South Carolina. That is not up for debate.
He promised it on the debate stage. He set the bar really high.
We speak facts. Unlike some other folks on that debate stage tonight, we were telling the truth. Look, there were a number of exchanges that went down on the debate stage, but something very important is that all week, leading into this week, people have been trying to play up their relationships with President Obama. I mean, we've seen it in ad after ad after ad, interview after interview. But tonight on the debate stage, Senator Sanders asserted that President Obama had the same position as him on Castro. And you saw Vice President Biden get visibly, I would say, annoyed, and he jumped in to correct the record. Look, we are going to be correcting the record all week. We want people to speak truth to power because South Carolinians and the voters deserve to know the truth.
Are you guys worried about Steyer taking away votes from Biden?
No, I think Mr. Steyer should be concerned about his investment in private prisons after it was known of the atrocities and the issues with them. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Lindsay, we'll have to wait to see on Saturday who actually wins South Carolina and what those percentages are.
Yeah, we'll count on your mom to give us the inside scoop of the South Carolina voters, Eva. Thank you. Yvette, just wanted to get your sense of a moment of the night for you.
There were were a few moments where I feel like there were some issues that we haven't really talked about a whole lot when you think about what a president needs to think about that came out. And one of those was that moment when we were talking about diplomacy versus military injection. We were talking about Israel. And I thought that Elizabeth Warren had this amazing moment, because we have not talked at all about the issue of, not a lot, I guess, about the issue of diplomacy versus military force. She had this touching moment where she said, I would allow the people from those two, she supports this two-state solution, I would allow those people from those two different groups to decide what they want, self-determination. They pressed her on moving the embassy. I would allow them, I would be an ally that would support, but I would also allow people to choose. I thought that was a really important moment for her. I thought she showed herself as a really strong, I think, juxtaposition to kind of what we think a commander-in-chief is, particularly under the era of Trump. I don't know that people are going to notice it, but what we know is that we have a generation of people who are tired of war. They know that Trump does not have any strategy around diplomacy, and I thought that was a real commander-in-chief moment for Elizabeth Warren that I don't know that people are going to be talking about. I wish they would.
We were talking about Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg as it relates to race a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I want to take a look at this moment from earlier tonight, a discussion about race between Klobuchar, Bloomberg, and Biden.
Look, I've earned the vote. I've worked like the devil to earn the vote of the African-American community, not just here, but across the country. I've been coming here for years and years, creating jobs here, making sure that the port, for example, that employs 1 in 11 people, we put $500 million in our administration just into this county. We've created jobs for people. The people know me. My entire career has been wrapped up in dealing with civil rights and civil liberties. I don't expect anything. I plan to earn the vote.
Oh, wait a second. I know that if I were black, my success would have been a lot harder to achieve. And I know a lot of black people that if they were white, it would have been a lot easier for them. That's just a fact, and we've got to do something about it than rather just demagogue about it.
Yes, and I think that what we need to do, instead of just reviewing everything from the past, is talk about where we're going to go forward. Martin Luther King once said that we are all tied in a single garment of destiny, and that what affects one of us directly affects all of us indirectly. So when there is racism in the criminal justice system, then we need to fix it. And to me, that means sentencing reform like the First Step Act and extending that to the states with the Second Step Act.
What I wish for everybody at home who are streaming with us, that you could just see Yvette's face, because she doesn't have to say a thing, but you just emote so much just with the facial expressions.
I have to say how real this is to me. Like, people say, Yvette, why are you so emotional? This is so real. You know, this hits home for me personally. I've been working in politics for a while, but only from a perspective of like really trying to liberate and save and change people's lives. And I can tell you, when I hear people say things like what Amy Klobuchar just said, knowing her record on criminal justice reform, it hits me in a real visceral place, in part when it comes to black and brown voters. Because I think that they take black and brown voters for granted. They think that we're not paying attention. And what really is challenging about this election is, one, we started with a field of black and brown candidates, and now we're down to no people of color. And that to me requires kind of a stop, period, pause. Let's reflect on what that means about our party. And then you hear people like Amy Klobuchar and Pete saying, we need to talk about middle America. We need to talk about suburban white women. We need to talk. The reality is that black and brown voters and progressive voters for a long time have been accepting the moderate choice that the Democratic Party has put up, because they didn't think that they could ever have a candidate, until we got to Barack Obama, of course, that could actually serve what their needs are. And now Bernie Sanders is in the lead. He's bringing together this multiracial, multi-generational coalition, and they're saying we must stop him, because we need to make sure we satisfy middle America, suburban white voters, and moderate voters. And for me, the question, if I was an African-American voter in South Carolina, I would be saying, why must we continue to wait? If I'm a Latino voter in Nevada, why must we continue to wait? Why does the party ask us to always be the ones to concede and not have the candidate that's fighting for us? And so I think this is the time to have that crucial conversation, particularly going into South Carolina and with Super Tuesday coming up.
Yeah, I was reading about this today, in the disenfranchisement, in particular about the black male voter. And do you think that there's too much emphasis put on this like mythical white voter, in the swing state, and that's where the money is going to. That's where I think it was over. I don't want to say exactly, but it was well over 1,000 visits in Iowa, maybe over 2,000 visits in Iowa that different candidates had made, versus 500 in South Carolina, for example. So is that a problem that you see? I mean, certainly in 2008, Barack Obama was able to energize the base. Black people came out, and of course not voting in a monolith, but to support, and there was something to be energetic about. Do you feel like that's missing this time around?
I agree. I do. Everything you said, yes and amen. And I do believe that that's a mistake. I think that when we start to think that we've got to reach or change our values or abandon our principles for this mythical Republican switching voter or moderate voter that's waiting for this moderate person, it doesn't work. And what we win when we expand the electorate, when I get our base out, we've got to energize them, and we've got to give them a reason to show up. And I don't know that we've figured that out. I think Bernie Sanders is close to that. I think Elizabeth Warren is close to that. But I'm definitely not seeing that with Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you so much, Yvette. Always a pleasure to talk with you and just get your knowledge and break it all down for us. Thank you so much for watching our post-debate show tonight. Our thanks to the whole team, Matt Dowd, Eva Pilgrim, Alice Parks, everybody on the ground there for us in South Carolina. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Stay tuned, of course, for more ABC News Live Prime after this break.